Hit the button. Hi, everybody. My name is Timothy Gager, and welcome to Virtual Fridays Dire Literary Series. And my guest and feature tonight is the wonderful Elle Nash. And let me tell you, let my screen share tell you a little bit of something about her, if we can get there. And unfortunately, I've closed her webpage. But anyway, I can pretty much wing it. This is like old school Dyer, where I used to get drunk and try to wing bios of people without looking at them, and it never worked out right. So spare me. So Elle Nash is the author of Animals Eat Each Other and her new book Nudes. She also runs workshops that we're going to talk about later. And she has been in some workshops with some really cool people too, which we'll talk about later. But her books have been described as, and I'll get into some of the ways these books have been described, but they're gritty, psychological, dysfunctional, and wonderful. So with that, let me turn it over to Elle Nash.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I'm just going to read a short story titled, I Live in a World Where Men with Money Want to Take Away My Wife. Okay. He does angel dust in Brooklyn sex clubs, has a job that allows him to commute and fuck in the city. He has an array of stylish tattoos. I'm married, unemployed, and afraid to eat toast. We are the same. All my boyfriends have been influencers, but I don't need the women I date to provide for me. Investing in people means eventually exploiting them. Playboy was last active 5 hours ago. It's 3:32 a.m. I wonder if he's with E, which he probably is. I wonder if they've had sex before falling asleep. They are both fire signs. All fights in marriage just come down to power. Of course they've had sex. 2 weeks later, I sit on the bed lotioning my legs, listening to the TV in the living room. E is watching Law and Order. It's her favorite show. She's watched the series at least 5 times all the way through since we've been married. Olivia Benson murmurs on the TV, the season where they'd repeatedly found the bodies of small children hidden inside suitcases. Olivia Benson is the most unlikable female character on TV. She says things that are flat, too hopeful. One of the bodies is a 9-year-old girl who's had a nose job, a beauty pageant contestant. You can't out-hope that. I lose myself in the slip of my hands greasing down my hairless skin and imagine Playboy's mouth against E's knee, his bare teeth pulling gently at her patella. He looks up at her with his tired eyes, the whites gray with sleep. She was his wife first. The fear of monogamy is that it ends, but E had wanted it. The security. So badly, she didn't want to compete anymore. I watched her give up her husband's 6-figure salary to date a poet and become a sex worker in Berlin. That she could give some man a child and it wouldn't be enough terrified her. She had to trust the process and follow it through. Believe by having a baby, the man would see what she could do for him and how deep her commitment to securing his love could be. He was combative, but isn't every man? I thought it was something. The day he flew into Tegel, she went to see him. Every friend we had knew what he was, who his family was. They welcomed him anyway. I wondered what Mariska Hargitay would say. I didn't want to be like every other woman, sucking his dick in the hope that infamy planted itself inside them. He'd say he liked a thing, music, a hobby, a movie, and that made her want to try it more. One conflict crushes, opens another. Each word a silver tide, swirling hooks through my sternum. At night, I can't sleep, and in the morning, I remember going through her phone again. I wake up groggy, and E is tense. She wants me to be vulnerable, but only in a language she can listen to. E and I take a trip around the city. The steering wheel hisses beneath her palms. The sky is more blue than I remember. I watch the sun blot shadows into the crepes of her skin. Stone monuments to the dead fence us in, and we circle, looking for a place to eat. I note an empty bank parking lot. She got into his car here once. I note an apartment complex. I'd once seen the same car parked there too. We turn right from a crossroads, and I see him walking down the street. My head pops off like a tire pressure gauge. He is every man wearing a black t-shirt and designer jeans. He has money, so there is no end to his wanting. E pays for our lunch, and I sulk in her impersonal conversation. My love for her is like the blunt side of an axe, and with each pound, I find new edges to the depths of my feelings. E feels a pain like yearning, but doesn't show it. She can only love a person by betraying them. She is a lover I cannot have and think about all the time. All E can think about is fucking her lover, but instead she is fucking her wife. E caresses her wife and says, "Oh yes," but she is saying it to her lover. Her wife pats her on the ass, and E smirks at her, but E is smirking at her lover. Her lover waits patiently for her inside her phone. Her lover is an unbroken thought. Her lover is an empty text box. And every day her wife interrupts each new one. She must violently flesh herself into every crevice of E's existence. She/I must remind her constantly of her/my presence. I guess this is just another one of those. One long last beg. And all E wants is one endless experience of what she loves, to exist in its flow, as one might stand beneath a waterfall, neck broken by the weight of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Elle. And that's from a book that's coming out shortly called Nudes, correct?
Yep, it should be out like end of March.
Is the rest of the book similar in tone, or is it do you is it as gritty? I guess is my question.
Yeah, I would say a lot of the stories are pretty similar in tone. Yeah.
Now, one question that writers hate is that story about me? So, is there an E out there?
No, I would say that all of my characters are composites of experiences and thoughts, sometimes just situations that I think about. So,
So, basically your mind can be a scary place.
sure, yeah. Just things I feel inspired by.
I also read that you are definitely you don't run from pain and the pain of life and it shows up in your work. Has there been a lot of pain?
I mean, yeah, I would say I think that's kind of a human experience. A lot of people feel pain. It's suffering is kind of a universal truth, you know? So, yeah, I would say I've definitely experienced that and intimately familiar with it.
Now, your last book, Animals Eat Each Other, ended up on a Oprah summer reading list. Now, how did that happen?
Honestly,
Sorry, I'm sounding accusatory. How did that happen?
yeah, I honestly don't know exactly how they got wind of it per se, but I know that um it my publisher had said that Animals was the first book they had that had sold out before the pre-order was done, so like before the release date. And so I don't know, there was just a lot of excitement about it. I got a starred review in Publishers Weekly, and I think that just put it on a lot of people's lists, like a lot of the more mainstream magazines, so that was really lucky. And I think that just might be how, like they had heard about it and someone read it, and so they just really liked it.
Yeah, that book was published by oh, now it's slipping my mind. Um,
Dzanc, yeah.
Zank. Yeah, there's a great crew there, and I hope they're doing well. So I mean, that's just wonderful that that worked out. All right, I'm gonna do word association with you. So
Sure.
these are people that you've taken workshops with. So first word or thought that comes into your mind. Lidia Yuknavitch.
Water.
Water. Why water?
Her memoir, The Chronology of Water. I always think of that, and she's like, I associate her with mermaids and stuff. So,
Steve Almond.
oh, rock music.
That's right. My life in heavy metal.
Yeah.
Yeah, Steve did a speech. By the way, I just want to. Steve did a speech at an MFA graduation ceremony that he said, "All right, what are you guys going to do now? Because there's not much. There's not much that you're going to do in writing." And everyone just kind of got deflated. But
I
that's
know
Steve.
he's super real. It's really funny.
All right, Chloe Caldwell.
Personal essays. I always think of her as the color yellow because she's blonde, and like her last book, I'll tell you, in person was yellow, and I was like, she's so sunny. It really fits.
Okay, Claire Vaye Watkins.
The desert, definitely.
So you're all into like um, very sensory things. So I'm throwing these names out, and I'm getting water, the desert, yellow. Does that is that a good way for you when you write to pull in metaphors and similes and or poetry in your work?
Yeah, I definitely would say I'm a pretty sensory writer. Yeah.
Now, do you write poems? Because there was in that story that you read out of the book Nudes, it was there's a lot of poetry within your prose.
Thanks. I didn't write poetry for a really long time, but actually just this year, I have kind of shifted my focus to try my hand at it again. So it's been really recent that I've been writing more poetry. Otherwise, all my prose was just, yeah, like really, um, I guess like, yeah, people would say it's poetic. I just never thought about line breaks or anything like that. So,
All right, so there's always interesting reviews by readers on Amazon. And I'm not talking about the one-star reviews from anonymous that you might have cut off in traffic and they're like, screw her, I'm going to give her a bad review. I'm talking about people that outdo each other. So tell me about this review. And I'm sure you don't know all reviews backwards and forwards. I'm going to tell you a quote from a review, and I want your impression of it.
okay.
Imagine if Sylvia Plath and Tyler Durden had a baby. That was describing your book.
That's so funny. Yeah, I guess I could see that. I'm really sad girl, but like I come from the lineage of dangerous writing, which is where Chuck Palahniuk came from too. So I could see how people would like kind of connect those two.
Yeah, well, you're a protagonist in Animals Eat Each Other. It's a coming of age story, but it doesn't always come of age the way you would expect it to. So tell me a little bit about that character.
Yeah, I definitely wanted to create a story that wasn't like that it didn't have a neat and tidy ending. And like one thing I thought was really important to demonstrate was just that, sometimes people can change, but they don't. And I really wanted to just see what that looked like in a story because so many Bildungsroman have um characters that are very affected by their coming of age and like they learn something new and come out of it kind of alive. And I wanted people kind of wondering whether or not like this character really came out of it in the best way.
So you're not pitching your book to like the Americana that wants the Hollywood ending, correct? Like, are your
Yeah.
readers looking for that?
Yeah. I mean, as much as I'd love to have my stories be more mainstream, they're just, I don't think they are. So,
Do you have people in your life, and I'm talking about family members, that look at your stuff and be like, "Hey, I just don't get it."
well, my family doesn't really read or interact with my stuff, which is probably really lucky. So there's that, you know, but I've also like, I've never really written or well I've never really considered what they might think because of me writing a particular thing either because I already have so much of an internal critic. I think if I was concerned with it, then I don't know, maybe I wouldn't have like written. Like it's hard. Like I just try not to like think about it.
Do writers have a higher or more volatile internal critic than most of the world, or is it just because we can recognize it?
I don't know. That's a really good question. Like I'm hesitant to say only writers because I think anybody who's very creative is going to have that kind of internal critic. And I think anyone who in general is very ambitious probably has that internal critic because that's kind of part of the engine of ambition is never being satisfied with something. So you can have lazy writers just as much as you can have ambitious writers. You know what I mean?
So,
So
what prevents you from quitting? Because a lot of people will either trash what they're working on or just decide that they're not cut out for this.
You know, that's a really good question. Like fiction is just really important to me in the sense that it's kind of an alternative world. And I'm like I've always kind of lived halfway in a fantasy realm my whole life anyway. So I really just enjoy being in that world. So there's that aspect of it. And I would also say that like in the pursuit of something, I find myself to be a perfectionist. I don't like to let things go, you know? So like I'm constantly thinking about if I'm thinking about a particular project, like if I'm working on a book length project or a short story, I'm always thinking about it, and like I just want to make it the exact way that like I need to make it. And I don't know why exactly like I have that desire to do it. Like maybe it's because um I've just always been very like internal as a person, and so writing is a very uh good way of being internal, right? But you still get to like express that stuff out in the world. And so it's just like been the most effective way for me to find it, you know. There's also like the love of language and love of literature and that sort of thing, but the driving behind it is, I don't know. Like part of me also wants to say ego, like that seems kind of obvious. Everyone wants validation and success. Um, so, but like you know, when you don't succeed in the way you want to, that can be crushing. So like I've really been thinking about that a lot lately in terms of like, is ego involved in art, and what happens if I let go of it, and what happens if I let go of the outcome of it, you know?
Yeah, and well, I forgot to mention that if you had a question for Elle, you can put it in the chat. So we do have one here. You mentioned that your story was about people who do not change. So how do you write a story with no conflict or no character motion while keeping the reader interested? What are the
Yeah,
devices you use?
sure. You can still definitely still have conflict in a story where people don't change, because tension is created by, in my viewpoint, the gap between what a person has and what they want. And so like you can still have that character go from point A to point B through the story. And like everyone is changed by like tiny minuscule moments. So when I said change earlier, I'm talking about like an overall change where someone comes upon the precipice of a big decision, and um they know, like for example, like maybe let's say like an addict, they know they could make the healthy decision, right? um but they don't. And so that was kind of like where I was going with it. And through, you know, through addiction or through anything, the gap between what someone has and what they want, there's all kinds of things that can still happen. So that's definitely what I focused on in my work. And then like the tension aspect of it, and then also just through like maybe psychological exploration is a huge way. um for that first novel, I never even thought about plot, even though I do believe plot is very integral to every story. So it was kind of an interesting experience. My next novel, I had like plotted out specifically and was more organized. It was a completely different experience. So
So your book of short stories, Nudes, were you writing these stories, some of them before Animals Eat Each Other came out, or do you tend to write, okay, I'm done with this project, let's start all short stories, and you sit down and you write short stories for 6 months? How do you work?
so I originally started out writing short stories, just to kind of like teach myself basically what I was doing. Animals started out as a short story, and then when I was working with my mentor, I kind of unpacked it until I realized that it was just not a short story anymore. And then when Animals came out, it was after that like I did start switching to short stories. Then I stopped doing that and I switched to another novel project. And when I was finally done with that and I like pushed it off to my agent, then I started working on short stories again. I kind of was like using them to procrastinate sometimes on the other as well, like productive procrastination.
Yeah, poetry
So,
is good for that too.
yeah, yeah.
So my question too with that is, from a short story writer to a novelist, you said your mentor fleshed it out. Was that a difficult process? Because you know, you might have thought that you have this, you know, start to end, middle already in the short story, and you expanded it. So how did it work for you to expand that?
So it really was a process of like I didn't know where the story was gonna go. And I also, when I first wrote the short story, I did that like it's like this early writer fallacy, which I see a lot, which is like to end the story right before the climax, you know? So I kind of had that in my story anyway. I didn't know like how I was really gonna end it. And as I was working on it, I realized that there were just a lot of like there actually were just a lot of key moments that could be fleshed out, other characters that could be introduced, and moments that could be slowed down and expanded, setting that could be described, and all of that. That like it kind of was like it was like this already, and then as I was adding stuff in, it was like marbling it all just like through it, you know. So
That's a great description.
yeah.
So your work is very gritty. Have you ever felt like there was something that you couldn't read for a live audience, and or that you were in the middle of reading and you kind of had like a holy shit moment?
That is a good question. I'm trying to think if there's something. Sometimes when I do read stories, I come up on like a moment I know that's gonna happen. Like sometimes it's like if it's like more sexual or something, and then I'm like, okay, you're about to read this to like a group of, like to a room of like 40 people. But when I come up on the precipice of it while I'm reading it, I kind of just like push it out of my head and just keep going. Like I just kind of try to maintain composure with it and like kind of go through it, and then it just becomes like not a big deal. So
So who are your, in terms of your writing and how your writing style ended up? Not who you liked, but who influenced your writing more than anybody else?
that's a really good question. I would say that the two biggest influences in my life have been Tom Spanbauer and Elizabeth Ellen. And that's because also I've had the luck and pleasure of working closely with them. So there are probably similarities in like theme or content or style, in terms of like how I've learned. So, and it's because of them that I felt motivated to write in general, like that I saw a pathway forward for my own creative career. So,
Now, that's a hardcore group. That when you go do readings, have you done a lot of live readings, or and how does doing a reading on Zoom differ?
yeah, it's funny because like I used to do reading, like organize readings or sign up for readings, and then I would regret doing it all the way up until like after I finally read the piece in front of the audience, and then I would feel great. Um, but like now it's almost like I kind of miss having that ability to go out and like mingle with people and see people face to face. um I like Zoom readings because they're convenient and it feels a little bit less stressful, just kind of like hanging out, um like in your room talking like on a laptop to a lot of people. I feel like pretty natural video chatting and stuff, so that's kind of how it feels. So it feels a little less formal in that way too. um so that's kind of like been the difference, but I do miss being able to like go out places.
Yeah, I don't miss the downtime. You know, like your reading is scheduled for 7, and like you're in Philadelphia, and it's like, okay, it's 4 o'clock, and I'm at this coffee shop. What the hell do I do with 3 hours? Like when you're at your house, there's no downtime, obviously.
Yeah, that's true. Like I when I did a book release in Brooklyn, I remember going out to like dinner beforehand, but then I was like, I'm not even hungry. Like, why am I doing this? Hanging out with other writers, feeling awkward, trying to get to know them, and like all this kind of stuff. Yeah. So,
So, what besides Nudes? What's going to be released after Nudes?
I have an announcement in the works, but I won't announce it till after Nudes comes out.
Just to us. I mean, there's only a few hundred of us
Right,
watching.
only a few hundred.
So, are you in your workspace now?
Yeah, this is like my little writing hovel
All
right
right. So
now.
what? So grab the closest book to you and tell me a little something about it.
Oh my gosh. So I do actually have an advanced review copy of Death and So Forth by Gordon Lish. It's like his next short story collection coming out from Dzanc, which I am probably about halfway through. Um, and it's really interesting reading Lish after having read so many of his students, right? Like he's like just his editing legacy has left such an impact on the world. Like I love Christine Scott and Gary L. Lutz and Tom Spanbauer, Ken Casey. There's all kinds of writers that he's affected. And I've never gotten super familiar with Lish's work. So I was pretty excited to just read some of his stories and get to know like about the writer behind like the legendary editing, you know.
So yeah, I mean, I think 5 or 10 years ago, the future of publishing was said to be very bleak. But I think though the small presses have sort of gained some steam. But Amazon comes in and takes the big cut from writers. So what do you think is going to end up happening? Cliffhanger.
Um, I have a lot of hope in the ecosystem of the indie press world. Like small presses really do a lot for experimental writers and writers whose work don't fit in the context of the mainstream. I do worry with big publishing that like access to big publishing is going to become a lot more difficult. Um, like if you are kind of like on that fringe in a way whereas it wasn't before, and that's partly because I think people are just very concerned with what is marketable. Like when a bigger publisher puts a book out, they're putting out a product, and like a writer isn't creating a product, they're creating art. That's not to say those books don't have merit or that they're not art. I just mean in the sense that like something that doesn't have more widestream appeal um could fall through the cracks. But because I think of the indie press ecosystem and what people really like want and enjoy reading, like we still have that. Like we still have good transgressive literature, experimental literature, stuff that you would probably not necessarily find if you just walked into a Barnes and Noble and looked at the front display.
Is there too much product coming out with like people putting stuff up in various websites or Facebook, etc.?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think everybody consumes whatever they consume. They create their own little echo chamber for what they want. And so it's kind of like, either like you're in it or you're not. That's kind of like, I think that just depends on how people are using like their own internet, probably.
So where should fringe writers go to be published? And when I see the word fringe writers, I think of Joe Buck, with a fringe jacket. But anyway, that's just me.
That's funny.
So where should fringe writers go to be published?
There's a lot of really great places. Like amphetamine sulfate is a great press. There's expat press. Um, like I'm trying to think. Every time I'm asked about literary magazines, I'm like, oh gosh. Entropy is good. Soft Skull is really good at putting out stuff, and they're actually a bit bigger, which is like nice. Like they're like a bigger small press. There's definitely a lot out there.
Yeah, I went to college with a guy at Soft Skull, which is pretty cool.
Oh, that is cool.
So, last question for you, and this is what I ask everybody. So, to buy your books, what is your favorite local indie bookstore or favorite indie bookstore at all?
Yeah, so here in Colorado, there's Tattered Cover, and then there's also a really cool place called Book Bar, and both of those are really great.
All
So
right. Well, it was fantastic to hear you read and to get to know you a little bit.
thank
Um,
you.
and I now are what? Boy, my screen sharing skills have been just terrible lately. All right, so I want to actually show people this. There it is. So if you want to find out more about Elle, it's ellenash.net, and you can find out more about her in the section called About Elle. And oh, I didn't get to, so you offer workshops too. Tell us a little bit about that. First, we'll show you books. So there's Animals Eats Each Other, and there is Elizabeth and Mary and Elle, which Mary Miller and Elizabeth Ellen. Did you guys go on a tour together, or?
No, we weren't able to go on a tour together. I wish we would have.
So actually, tell us about your workshop and what people when they sign up, what do they get?
Sure. So I run a workshop called Textures, and in its current iteration, it is 3 months long, and there are new discussions that occur every week. So that's 12 weeks of discussions, and it kind of works a little bit like a low residency MFA where you have pages that are due every month. So I think it's like 20 or 30 pages are due at the end of every month. Then we break off into groups, and you get feedback, but there's also mentoring. So Every month we'll meet one-on-one and we discuss your work and we discuss your goals and anything that's impeding you from your goals. So kind of the hope of the workshop is like, say you have like, you know, a third or half of a novel, or you have a novella that you've been working on, and by the end of the workshop you'll have something at the end of it that you feel confident in getting ready to submit. So
That sounds great.
yeah.
So thanks once again. I realize I had you on spotlight view the whole time, which means that my cutaway questions was just my voice. But like, it was cool. You did a great job, and
Thanks.
I'm going to say goodbye to the people on Facebook now. If you guys were watching on the Facebook group, welcome, and we'll be here next week as well. If you want to read at the open mic and or be available to help out with a Q&A by putting questions in the chat, use the Zoom link next time. But other than that, thanks for coming, and we'll see you soon.